Coming past the 8th pole, it's Ruffian in front by 7 lengths. Something Regal on the outside, second point in time. The other's now far back as Ruffian draws away to lead by 9. It's Ruffian in front and going easily.
Hello, it's Bob Pandolfo. Welcome to Power Pace. It's Wednesday, June 7, 2023. And just wanted to let you know on Saturday, I'm going to have a Power Pace about the Belmont Stakes. And I'll be handicapping the race on my YouTube channel here. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel so I can keep doing the videos. It's free. I want to talk about something, that recently there's been a lot of talk about the injuries in the sport of thoroughbred racing. And of course we had the 12 horses that died at the current Churchill Downs meet. Next week they're going to go over and run the rest of the meet over at Ellis Park in Kentucky because they think maybe something's wrong with the track. 2 of those deaths had nothing to do with the track. They were horses in the Safi Joseph barn that just dropped dead. But I just want to mention that a lot of tracks, a lot of dirt tracks have had these stretches where they had an unusually high amount of fatalities. In fact, years ago in Southern California, you may remember that they switched. They actually state mandated, the California Horse Racing Authority mandated that they go to synthetic tracks, and they put synthetic tracks at Hollywood Park, Del Mar, and Santa Anita, and they were working good at Hollywood. They had the cushion track, they called it, but then Santa Anita totally screwed it up. They didn't put in the same type of drainage system as Hollywood Park, so they had a lot of problems, especially when it rained. So then they switched to something, I think it was called Proform or something like that, some other kind of synthetic track, which I believe that company is out of business. I actually think Christian's track is probably out of business too. So what happened though, a couple of the trainers, some of the horsemen complained about the synthetic track, not because of injuries, but because, they like to race on dirt. Bob Baffert was one of them, John Sadler, 2 of the top trainers there, and they had a lot of power there and a lot of influence, especially Baffert. He buys, he has owners who buy these wealthy owners who buy these, expensive horses, and they're bred for dirt. And, everybody knows that, on synthetic, that may not be the best type of horse. If you're going to race a lot on synthetic, you're probably going to need a horse with a little bit more of a different type of pedigree, with maybe some turf influences in there. A lot of horses that are bred for turf run well in synthetic, but there are hybrid type of pedigrees. But Baffert basically buys horses that are bred for speed and dirt. But the thing is that he was winning on the synthetic track. I mean, he was winning. To me, it's he was winning just as much as he wins anyway. He always wins at a high percentage. But that was definitely one of the reasons why they switched back to dirt. But I just want to make something clear. Del Mar, when they were running on dirt before they switched over to synthetic, they had a lot of problems. I mean, they had 2 really bad meets with a lot of fatalities. And I'm not going to give you any statistics because it's a moot point. Just the point is they had 2 very, very bad meets with a lot of horses breaking down at Del Mar, and that's one of the reasons why they mandated to switch to synthetics. Then I think it was in 2008 they went back to dirt, and then Santa Anita had all kinds of problems with the original dirt track that they put in after they switched from back to dirt. I mean, it was a terrible track. They had cheap horses going, 6 furlongs and 107 and change. I mean, it was bizarre. But many tracks, Churchill Downs has had problems in the past too. This isn't the only time Churchill Downs has problems. There have been, Arlington Park. Now, Arlington Park, you may remember, they closed down, unfortunately. It used to be a great track, beautiful track. But, before they went to synthetic, they had a lot of problems, and they were having horses, a lot of fatalities. And again, I'm just mentioning a few. A lot of racetracks have had stretches, a lot of dirt racetracks have had these stretches where all of a sudden they had a lot of fatalities. And at the beginning of my broadcast here, I show Ruffian, and the year that Ruffian broke down in the match race, that summer, there were a number of breakdowns on the far turn there, right where she broke down, where she took a bad step. They had a lot of problems in that area of the track at Belmont that year, and I was worried about it, even though I was a very young man and I wasn't in the business yet. And I wasn't the only one. Other people said, that they were having some problems with the track that year. Now, NYRA, New York Racing Association, does a great job with their dirt tracks. In fact, they're probably better. In the last 10, 15 years, they're probably better than they've ever been. Maybe even the last 20 years. I mean, they've really. Years ago, they had a CEO named Charles Hayward, who came in and he made a lot of changes. He hired a new track superintendent, and he said, "I don't want any track biases. I don't want," because he used to have these situations like at Belmont. They'd have a dead rail. Some of you may remember, who been around a long time. They used to call it the balcony move, or all these horses all the winners would be like 6, 7 wide in the final turn because the rail was dead. And then in the Aqueduct inner track, which they haven't used now in years, that used to be speed favoring. And so Hayward said, "Look, I don't want a speed favoring track. I don't want a track that has a dead rail. Let's get a more consistent surface." And they did. I mean, they did a great job. So you got to give the credit where credit is due. And the New York Racing Association has very good dirt tracks for the most part. So all right. So the point is, there have been a lot of tracks though have had problems here and there with these stretches where horses just start breaking down at an unusually high rate, and it's alarming. And one of the worst was Santa Anita, a few years ago, and everybody remembers that. Now, the thing is, why? Why did the horses break down? And when I first started following thoroughbred racing, like around 1970, 1971. And I followed, harness racing and thoroughbred racing. I started following at the same time. There weren't as many horses breaking down, and horses raced more often back then. In fact, statistically, I've seen where the average thoroughbred used to race 14 times a year and now races 7 times a year. So, and they broke down less and raced more, which is concerning. So now there's a lot of theories on this. You see people, chatting about this and saying, "Well, it's the breeding, or it's the drugs," or there's all these different theories. And I think we have to be cognizant of the fact that nobody really knows what it is. I mean, we don't know for sure. I have my suspicions. I mean, I think that the breeding might have something to do with it, but I have no way to quantify that. I mean, there isn't any data. It's unfortunate, but I think that the industry, has not done a good job in investigating all this. They sometimes they take a knee-jerk reaction, like in Southern California years ago, they went to synthetic tracks because they thought they'd be safer, and they are safer. But the thing is they didn't run any, they didn't do any sort of research to find out why the horses were breaking down more than they did years ago. You know what I mean? You could do it. I mean, you could study the breeding patterns. You could study the way trainers train their horses now. You could study the drugs that the trainers are giving the horses. Because I mean, let's face it, there are things that are a lot different now than they were years ago. Now let's go back to when I first started following the sport, say around 1970, the early 70s. None of the horses raced on Lasix. Okay, I mean, it was not. It was against the law to race on Lasix. It was not approved. And ever since they did approve Lasix, and a lot of the horses, like in a lot of races, every horse in the race is on Lasix. Now they have changed some of the rules the last few years, and in the process of changing them even more. Now you have the horse racing, the HISA, this government overview kind of group that is going to look at racing and keep an eye on and protecting the animals. They have all these different drug rules now, and they're going to control it. I mean, it's still in the process of getting established, but it's here, and so they will be controlling, like what kind of fines a trainer gets, and what kind of the amount of drugs that a horse can use, the kind of drugs a horse you can give a horse, that type of thing. So instead of going state by state or track by track, it'll be it'll be the same for everyone. So that was passed into Congress a few years ago, and just is being implemented this year, the HISA. So the thing is, though, is that they are phasing out Lasix in some areas. Like now, you can't run the 2-year-olds on Lasix, and in major stakes races like the Kentucky Derby, you can't run Lasix. The Breeders' Cup, you can't run on Lasix, which is good because a lot of people are suspicious of Lasix. They think maybe it masks other drugs, and there are a lot of horsemen that think you need Lasix, but we have to be aware that in Canada, United States, and North America, it's the only place in the world where they use Lasix on race day. And they race a lot of horses in Europe, of course, and in Asia and Japan and South America. They're all over the world. They race horses, and they don't use Lasix on race day. They don't allow it, but we allow it in North America. But like I said, it is being phased out in a way, or in particular instances. But that is something that hasn't really been studied because, again, before we started using Lasix, the horses seemed to break down less often. Does that have something to do with it? It's hard to say. The horses, that obviously it's diuretic. It's a diuretic, so the horses can lose weight. That day they can actually drop quite a bit of weight. But again, nobody really knows for sure. As far as the breeding, now obviously there's a lot more inbreeding. They breed they breed speed to speed. Years ago, it seemed like they were breeding more for stamina. So inbreeding speed for speed. Now a lot of the breeders are going to say, "Oh, it's fantastic, it's great." The breeders, they always, they're biggest. The breeders' biggest fans are the breeders. They love themselves, and they think they're the greatest. But the thing is that we don't know if a lot of these breeders are actually doing a good job or not. Are they breeding horses that break down easier? And it depends a lot on the lineage. Certain sire lines or certain lines are probably more apt to get injured than others. It depends. And again, I'm not an expert in that. I know a lot about breeding. So when it comes to handicapping. But as far as which horses are more, which sire lines or which lines are more durable or less durable, I really don't know. And the thing is, again, where's the research? How do we know? If I was buying horses, I can tell you right now, I would definitely be doing research into that, because if I was going to buy, say, 2-year-olds or horses that hadn't raced before, or yearlings, I would want to try to buy horses that were less likely to go lame or to break down. So I would try to research and find the most durable lines, and then of course you have to also see can they run, are they fast enough. But it does seem like the breeding is different. There is more breeding for speed as opposed to stamina. And does that make a difference? Does that cause more injuries? Again, we don't have the statistics. And as far as the other drugs, it's not just Lasix. I think that overall there are more therapeutic type of drugs that are allowed now than there were years ago. And I think there are more trainers that use drugs now than there were years ago. And that's my opinion. Again, do I have statistics on it? No. But there's a lot of those old-time trainers, I don't think too many of them really drug their horses much. I just don't think they did. Especially if you go back before I even started following it. You had these old-time horsemen. They just fed the horse. They took care of the horse. If the horse was sick, they gave the horse drugs. But now, you have a lot of these trainers who, are constantly giving these horses all different types of things. You may remember a few years ago when Bob Baffert, the Hall of Fame trainer Bob Baffert, he had 7 horses drop dead in a 16-month period, and he said that he gave all of his horses a thyroid drug because he thought it would build them up. Now, that's a classic example, right? The horses didn't have a thyroid problem, And you and me, right? If a doctor tells us, he wants to put us on a thyroid drug, that's going to be because we have some sort of thyroid problem, like we're gaining too much weight or something like that, or we can't gain weight, or we can't lose weight, or what I mean? It's something medically wrong with our thyroid, and then you have to go on a thyroid drug. Well, he was given the thyroid drug to his horses, and there was nothing medically wrong with them at all. He just thought I was going to make them run better or something like that, which one of the veterinarians out there, Rick Arthur, who was at that time on the California Horse Racing Board, CHRB, he said that didn't make any sense. And Rick Arthur at the time had been in the sport, I think, over 30 years. He was a long-time veterinarian, and he was like, I don't know why you would give him a thyroid drug to build him up. If anything, that might make him lose weight, he said. And this is what Rick Arthur said. And a lot of the trainers, they experiment with these drugs that are legal, right? I'm talking about drugs that they're allowed to use, and I just don't think they did that as much years ago. I could be wrong. Again, I don't have the data, but there is quite a bit of anecdotal evidence of that. And I just mentioned that situation with Baffert, where those horses died, and he claimed he gave him this thyroid drug, and that also didn't make any sense in that the thyroid drug shouldn't have killed the horses. I mean, unless he gave him way too much, and who knows if he was being honest. I don't know. We really don't. Maybe he gave him something else besides the thyroid drug. But the point is, though, is that that's another thing that the sport could investigate to see, are we giving the horses drugs they don't need, and is that affecting the horses in a negative way? Is it making them more likely to get injured? Now, there's no question that if you use pain-killing drugs, and some of these trainers, including Baffert, have gotten drug positives with drugs that are used to mask pain or soreness, reduce inflammation. So obviously, if a horse has, something, some sort of nagging pain, and you give it a drug to take away the pain, it could be more susceptible to injury then, because it's going to be running hard. That's like some of these, years ago, a lot of more horses used something called bute, right? And bute does that. I mean, it reduces inflammation. So you're running a horse that really has something wrong with it, and you're giving him a drug to mask that, So, it just, that doesn't seem to make sense, if you don't want horses to break down. So these are all things that, nobody really knows. If it's a combination, maybe it's a combination of breeding and drugs, and nobody knows it because they haven't done the research, and they really should. And another thing too, by the way, is that even the way the horses are trained now, a lot of the trainers, including some of the very successful trainers, don't like to race their horses that much. They think that the horses race better, off of long breaks. Like they don't race them. Remember last year, the horse that won the Kentucky Derby, Rich Strike, they skipped the Preakness. Now the trainer Eric Reed, right after the race, he said, "Yeah, we're going to run him in the Preakness. Sure, why wouldn't we run him?" And then a few days later, he says, "Well, I don't really like to run him back that soon. He really likes to get a lot of rest." So he skipped the Preakness, which was I thought was ridiculous. I mean, first of all, the Preakness is the easiest race to win of the three. I mean, there's in a stretch of I think it's 22 years, 50% of the Kentucky Derby winners won the Preakness. So your chances of winning the Preakness are really good if you won the Kentucky Derby, and especially in recent years, because so many trainers skip it, that it's basically almost like a claiming race. I mean, it's an easy race to win. And he skipped that, and he said, "Well, we're going to run him in the Belmont Stakes because that's more suitable to him," which made absolutely no sense. The Preakness is 1 mile 3/16, and the Derby is 1 1/4 miles. So it was a 16th less in distance. And the thing is, everyone knows that the Belmont Stakes is a much tougher race to win because it's 1.5 miles, and these are young 3-year-olds. So I don't know. I mean, now Eric Reed's not training Rich Strike anymore. He just switched barns, but I mean, the horse hasn't won a race since then. They raced him over his head. They put him in terrible spots. I mean, they never gave him a chance. They could have put him in like a grade 3 stakes at one time or something, give him a chance to win, get his confidence back. Now the horse, his last race was terrible. But the thing is this theory where, well, we got to rest the horse. It doesn't make any sense. Because, like, if you look at a horse like Rich Strike, he had only raced a handful of times coming into the Derby. So, like, he didn't need a rest. And, he could have run him back 2 weeks later. I actually think, he would have probably run one of the best races of his career in the Preakness, because he had just run the best race of his career in the Derby, and he's a young horse he was a young horse in the prime of his life. He'd only raced, a handful of times, and he probably would have run, he should have been set 2 weeks later, plenty of rest if you've only raced like 5 or 6 times. These are not like older horses that are all worn out and everything. Woody Stevens, the great trainer who won 5 straight Belmont Stakes, he used to race his horses the week before the Belmont Stakes. And, he said you can't, his theory was, you can't really train a horse hard enough to run a mile and a half and to run well at a mile and a half, So he would put him in a race a week before. I mean, I think one of the horses, he won the Peter Pan. Back then, he used to run the Peter Pan before the Belmont. And, he won the Peter Pan, then he put him in the Belmont, he won the Belmont. He won 5 Belmonts in a row. I mean, Woody Stevens knew how to train a horse to run a mile and a half. And his theory was race him into shape, not train him into shape. But, of course, years ago, they did that, and the horses seemed sounder. So this is another thing, are the horses breaking down more because they don't have enough foundation? And that's another, possibility. They're not racing. You have these trainers. They don't want to race the horses. They keep them in the barn. They think that the horse is going to race better. And it's funny because even if you look at a trainer like Todd Pletcher, who's an enormously successful trainer, he has he likes to rest his horses. He doesn't like to run them a lot. And he likes to run them off these layoffs. But the thing is that who's to say that he wouldn't have been just as successful if he raced them more often? I mean, he's buying the most expensive horses. He's one of those trainers like Baffert and a few other trainers that have these rich owners, and especially Pletcher. I mean, Pletcher and Baffert probably have the richest owners and buy the best horses. So, I mean, if you're going to go into the auction and spend millions and millions of dollars buying the best, most beautiful, well-bred horses, you're going to win a lot of races. All you need is a competent trainer, really. And you're going to win a lot of races whether you give them 3 months in between each race or whether you give them 6 weeks in between each race. It's not going to make that much difference, in my opinion. All right, this is my opinion, but it's not going to make any difference. You're still going to win. I think Pletcher would be just as successful, as he is if he raced his horses a little, more often. I just don't see. There isn't any sort of data to suggest that the horses need these big breaks in between, because like years ago, they raced them more often and the horses won, they did just as well. I mean, you look at the great trainers from years ago, Woody Stevens is one that I mentioned, Charlie Whittingham, there's many, great trainers. And I mean, they raced their horses without these long periods of rest, and the horses were durable. I mean, some of these trainers had horses that ran, until they were 6, 7 years old. Now they retire the horses by they're 3 years old, So it's hard to believe that racing them less often is better for them when they break down more. They race less now. They're not as durable. They're not as sound. And years ago they used to race. And you have to have a foundation. It's just like a human being. Like say I wanted to go into the Olympics, right? And I wanted to be a sprinter or something like that. I mean, you have to compete, right? You can't train and just train into the Olympics and win it. You have to go into different races and race against competition to toughen up, to get that real, test and durability, right? You're not going to just, I haven't run a race in 2 years. I want to go into the Olympics and win. No, it's not going to work. And that would be for, all these sports like swimming, track and field. I mean, you name it. I mean, you have to compete to get, rugged and built up. So you can't just like lay around and say, well, I'm just going to, do some, bench pressing and some jogging and I'll be ready. No, that's not going to work. You need a foundation. You have to get toughened up. And And so that's another thing that may be the problem. The thing is, though, is we don't really know. We don't really know what it is. Is it, is it the trainers aren't training the horses, for durability? Is it the breeding? That's, the inbreeding, speed that's making the horses less fragile. I mean, more fragile, less durable. Is it the, some people say it's the racing surfaces, of course, and we're going to get into that in a second. Is it the drugs? The horses have too many drugs in it? Is it the Lasix? So there's all different, possibilities. Could be a little, could be a little bit of a number of different things. Now I want to talk about the racing surfaces, okay? As you know, in America, we've been racing on dirt, forever. But turf racing is much more prominent now. In the last 10 years or so, we're running a lot more turf races, and the reason why is that they get big fields, so you tend to get bigger payoffs on turf. It seems like a lot of owners, a lot of trainers like to run their horses on turf. You get, you just get more horses in the entry box, and of course, if you have like a 12-horse field going a mile and a 16th on turf, your chances of getting a long shot winner are better, than if you're running, a 6-horse field on dirt. So bettors like them. I mean, because a lot of gamblers, they bet horses because they want to try to get a hit. They want to get a big payoff. You have a better chance of a big payoff in a big field, and you're getting, that in turf racing. And of course, turf racing also, you get a lot of closers that win, which is more exciting. So you have horses that could be far back and just explode in the final quarter, and it's very exciting. And you could have a whole cavalry charge coming down the stretch. It's just very exciting racing. Of course, in Europe, they race almost all on turf. They don't race on dirt at all over in Europe. They either race on turf or synthetic tracks. But let's just look at some of the changes that are going on besides turf. And the other one is, of course, synthetic tracks. I mentioned how Southern California went to synthetic, and then they went back to dirt. But what's happened in recent years is that a company has emerged called Tapeta. It's Tapeta. I have it up on the internet here, a little something about Tapeta. So Tapeta has emerged as sort of the reference point, or the best quality synthetic track. They used it in the UK, and here it's used at Gulfstream Park, Woodbine, Presque Isle Downs in Pennsylvania. What am I missing? I think they're going to install Tapeta at Belmont. I'm pretty sure they're going to use Tapeta. They're putting that in next year. Turfway Park is another one. Turfway Park. So they've all, gone to Tapeta. And, so the question is that safer than dirt? And it is safer. I mean, in my opinion, it's safer. I have not seen any statistics that, disprove what I feel is the fact that the Tapeta is the best surface if you're trying to protect horses from fatal injuries. Now, here's the statistics from the Jockey Club. The Jockey Club's equine injury database show the surface with the fewest deaths per 1,000 horses is synthetic. Now, this is not just Tapeta, all right? This is based on all the synthetic tracks, but I actually believe that Tapeta has even a better rate, because this is going from 2009 to 2022, okay? You can see that there were 534 fatalities on synthetic per 482,169 starts, or 1.11 per 1,000 starts. On dirt during that same period, the death rate on the main track, on dirt, was 1.86 per 1,000 starts. And grass was 1.41, and this is a 13-year period. But this is including synthetic tracks that are not Tapeta. Tapeta, I believe, is even better. It has a lower rate than 1.11. And now here's a Tapeta website from the UK. It's showing, here they had 0 fatalities from 4,754 runners at Newcastle at that meet, and a total of 3 for 10,000. Over 3 years, look at the rate, 0.03 fatalities over 3 years at Wolverhampton. The last fatality at Newcastle was a heart attack. Last fatality at Wolverhampton was struck into from behind by another horse. So if you take out those fatalities, they have like one fatality, in over 5,000 races. And you can see here it says improved safety. They also claim it has reduced kickback, which is good, because that means it's better for the horses breathing, and plus they won't get as much in their eyes. And some of you may be aware that sometimes with young horses in particular, they don't run well sometimes in their first start or their first couple of starts because they're getting kickback and they're not used to it. Because when they're training by themselves, and then they put them in a race, and all of a sudden they're getting hit in the face with dirt, or the horses are not used to it. And sometimes, I've caught long shots from horses who didn't race well because you could see that they didn't like the kickback, and then I bet them the next time out, and the jockey, especially if you have a good jockey who's a smart jockey, a veteran, the jockey will take them outside then, knowing that, hey, my horse didn't like being inside and getting all this stuff kicked in his face, so you think he'll keep him out in the track, try to get him, away from the kickback, and the horse will win. You can catch some good long shots like that, if you spot the horses that are, not racing well because of the kickback. Now, usually once the horses get a few starts in them, and, they get used to it, so it's no problem. But they claim that they have, reduced kickback. So now, we're seeing more, tracks now going to this particular type of service, tapetum. That is the industry standard now for synthetic surfaces. And I mean, again, I know a lot of people don't like to hear this, but it is safer than dirt. And in fact, it's probably safer than racing on turf. I mean, and it's a great surface to train your horses on. Because it gives them a better foundation because it's more cushioned. And of course, another reason why they're going for it, like Gulfstream put theirs in because they get a lot of rain in Florida, at certain times of the year. As soon as the weather gets warm in the spring, you'll get a lot of rain in Florida all through the spring and the summer, and even into like October, you get tropical storms. And of course, you can't race on turf when it gets too wet. It'll get dug up, it can get slippery. Well, this surface, the tapetum surface, it drains beautifully, and so the reason why they put that in is they can race their turf horses on tapetum when it's bad weather, or if the turf horses are getting worn down, they can race on tapetum for a few weeks. And they can have some races on tapetum and some races on dirt, but meanwhile they can let the turf course kind of get healthy again, to get ready for, say, a big section of a meet where they're going to have a lot of stakes races on turf. And Belmont's doing that for the same reason. They want to put in a synthetic track at Belmont. It's going to be a 1 mile track for the same reason, to try to, for 2 reasons. One is, to try to, protect the turf course if they have to, give the turf course a little bit of a rest. They have 2 turf courses, but they'll have the tapetum as an alternative. And another is for bad weather. So, we all know if you follow racing in New York, like at Saratoga, for instance, if you get a lot of thunderstorms, they have to take the races off the turf. So you could have like an 11-horse field on turf, and it's a really great race. And then it rains, and next thing you know, you have 4 horses racing in the mud because everybody scratches their horses. Well, if they have, like at Belmont, when they put the synthetic track in, and it rains, instead of taking the horses from the turf and running them on a muddy or a sealed, sloppy main track, they'll run them on the synthetic track, which I believe is going to be tapetum. And I don't think you'll see like the 4-horse fields. I think you'll see more like 8, 9, 10-horse fields. Because a lot of trainers will just say, "Fine, I'll run my turf horse on that. He'll like it." And especially if the safety factor continues. There are people, I have read things, even some racing writers have tried to say that, it's an exaggeration, that, you can make a dirt track as safe as tapetum. You could, but that would not be the norm, in my opinion. Yes, there have been dirt tracks where they've their record of fatalities is pretty low over a long stretch of time, but inevitably most of them run into some sort of stretch where things aren't going well and horses are breaking down. And even if you take the safest dirt tracks, I have not seen any evidence that that dirt tracks are as safe as tappeta. And I know people don't like to hear that because you have a lot of people like, oh, I don't like when they race on tappeta. I don't like dirt. But the bottom line is that the statistics seem, to me, from what I've seen, seem overwhelming that tappeta is the safest surface to run horses on. And naturally, if they go more to tappeta, and I think this is going to happen, where like even now it's happening. Once they put this in Belmont Park, you're going to have Belmont and Gulfstream, two of the biggest tracks in the country, with synthetic tracks. That goes to show that it's taking more of a foothold in the industry. So what will happen is that they can change the breeding, the way they breed these horses a little bit. You don't have to breed for speed on tappeta. You should be breeding more for stamina and for endurance. And maybe they'll run longer races, more mile and a quarter races, mile and 3/8, mile and 3/16, mile and a half. And get sturdier horses that are running at a slower pace. When you run a longer race, and that's one of the reasons why horses break down less on turf, they go at a slower pace because it's a longer race. So you can't, and it's a more tiring surface. Like, turf, generally speaking, it's much harder to go wire to wire. And if you're running, let's say, a mile and 3/8 on turf or tappeta, because of the longer distance and the more tiring surface, because tappeta usually is not as speed favoring as dirt, and the same thing with turf. It's usually not as speed favoring. And with the longer distances, the riders have to slow the pace down to try to save something, because they know their horse isn't going to go out there and be able to put up blazing fractions and still hang on, finish last. So they're running at a slower pace, and then of course they start to run faster at the end of the race. But that alone, in my opinion, is going to result in less breakdowns. If I had thoroughbred horses, I would only buy horses that were horses for distance horses. I would not want to have a lot of sprinters in my barn if I was an owner, because when if you're running 6 furlongs, you're running full speed right from the get-go, and to me, and in my opinion, that's harder on the horses. You see these horses. I've seen 2-year-olds making their first start. They draw the inside and they go 21 1/4 to the quarter and 44 2 to the half. And I've never even raced before. And you're like kind of like gunning them, And if you run them in longer races, the fractions are slower, and the horse gets to just relax into his stride, rather than being under such tremendous pressure. So just running longer races, like if you run a bunch of long races on tappeta or turf, you're probably going to have sounder horses right there, just because there's less stress. As they run into these intense fractions. Again, that's my opinion. But I've been following the sport for a long time. That's the way I see it. So we'll see what happens. But tappeta, is becoming the industry standard for synthetic, and it does seem like you're going to get less horses breaking down. Now, I just want to mention one more thing. When I first started following, and you can go back and even look at videos of horses from years ago. It seemed to me like there were more horses years ago that had a sturdier looking body. So what I mean by that is their legs in particular. I see more horses now, and again, this is an anecdotal type thing. I don't have any statistical evidence to prove this, but to me it looks like there's a lot more horses with skinny legs. And of course, these horses are big animals, and so if you have skinny legs and you have this huge weight on it and you're pounding into the track, to me that means the horse is more likely to have like some sort of leg injury or ankle injury or knee injury. If you look at some of the great horses from years ago, they had I thought a more powerful looking lower body and legs, more sturdier looking legs. And maybe that's because they were breeding more for stamina years ago as opposed to breeding for speed. You know, if an animal's stockier and bigger, you know, maybe they think, you know, the horse is going to run slower, and he's more of a, you know, a long distance horse. You know, and even then, it's hard to really evaluate that, because some of the really fast sprinters are stocky horses, but they're usually not that tall. So, you know, like there are some sprinters that kind of look a little bit like a quarter horse, where they're very muscular and they have very strong, thick legs, but they're not that tall, but they can move their legs really fast. They have like that really fast piston action, and they're really good sprinters. So naturally, if you want a horse to win, like say the Kentucky Derby at 1.25 miles, or the Belmont Stakes at 1.5 miles, you're going to want a horse with a longer stride. But I don't think you need, you know, to try to, you know, breed these horses to have these thin legs. You can get, you know, big, powerful horses. They had them years ago, you know. And you still have them. It depends on the pedigree. You know, certain pedigree lines, the horses look sturdier. Others, they look a little, you know, streamlined to the point where they have the skinny legs. But anyway, that's another thing that I've noticed. So if I was buying horses, I would look for horses that are sturdy looking, you know, that look like they have, you know, legs that can handle that body. But anyway, that's just some of my feedback. Now, remember, Saturday, I will have my analysis on YouTube for the Belmont Stakes. Thanks for listening, and remember to subscribe to my channel. It's free. Thanks, and good luck.